Hi, this is a follow-up to my presentation. That's a video presentation on the key changes in professional development, something that I like to call a paradigm shift in how we do professional development. It's based on current research on the effectiveness of professional development. I would like to share with you the 3 steps that I took for the presentation, what I did before it, what I did during it, and what we can still do now after it. Let me begin by sharing with you what I did before the presentation. Well, before the presentation, I sent out a survey to everyone, inviting everyone to answer a set of questions to help identify what they deem to be qualities of successful professional development, and as well as qualities of unsuccessful PD. I also shared a presentation that I made on pretty much the same topic back in 2010. It was a critical look at PD back then, and using that as a good starting point to see how much things have changed since. I also invited comments on the topic from everyone. The purpose of this was to help me understand perhaps what your expectations were from the presentation, and then I would hopefully make some revisions in the presentation to address them. So I also tried to model all of the concepts that came out of my presentation in 2010 with this. That's why we have a before activity, an activity during the presentation, and activities now after the presentation. Let me begin to share with you now what I did during the presentation. And that's what this document we have in the background is really about, is the focus of that. This is the document that I used to support my presentation. And during that presentation, I set to work on engaging those who were present in the topic. I started by sharing the survey results. What people made clear to me were the following. Those items that are highlighted in red bold are items that particularly stood out from the answers that I got. Following this, we did some group work. I invited people to participate in a think, pair, share activity. And through that, I asked them to work in groups to identify the PD methods that they're using now, and then to also discuss a particular PD element. I listed 5 of them, and I've delegated these to the various groups and invited each group to look at them and then share their answers with the other groups. Now, the results of this I'm making available to you via a link if you wish to have a look at them. Then I moved on to looking at the recent research on effective professional development. And out of that emerges these same 5 elements. The 5 elements that I asked people to review in groups just a moment ago. And then I went into discussion on how each one of these are deemed to be important, how they're deemed to be effective in promoting professional development and realizing professional development that has an impact. I won't go into those in detail. I think you can read these here or through the link to the actual document itself. It was these 5 elements that I then used to look at traditional PD, how we do professional development. We often do professional development. This is typically through a workshop or presentation. I looked at it and how it was supportive, ongoing, formally recognized, collaborative, and impactful. What I found echoes the literature. It goes back to my presentation in 2010, that most of the professional development that we have is largely active for the presenter, largely active for the organizer in finding people and inviting them to present, but it's largely passive for those of us that do attend. So it's typically low on all 5 of these elements that are deemed to be important to have effective professional development. So, what are the alternatives? That's where we moved next. So I looked at and I shared with those that were present the following. These have come about since 2010. Maybe you've heard of it. Social media, the use of things like Twitter or Facebook even to engage with people online, building a professional learning network as it's sometimes called. Still weak, very self-directed, very unstructured. Talked about that briefly. Then I moved on to looking at MOOCs, massive open online courses. These have also emerged, and they're comparable. A little bit better than the PLN. They typically tend to be online. They tend to be content focused, but becoming increasingly more collaborative. And their impact, hard one to measure. The next one, the edCamp concept. Here, people are invited to come together on a particular day, on a theme, and work out a set of professional development workshops based on interests and based on the expertise that's come to the event. More on that through the links that I've provided. Next, I presented how we have online tutorials. And these tend to be an improvement over the latter. They can be supportive. They can be ongoing. They can be formally recognized if they're aligned to a strategic plan. They can also be collaborative if they invite discussion threads. Their impact, well, again, depends if they're research-based and they're connected to good practice, in which case they typically are. They can have a big impact. And lastly was looking at learning communities. It was learning communities that I thought were the most compelling. Because with learning communities, all 5 of these elements are often present. They tend to be supportive. People come together to work as a community sharing their findings. They're typically ongoing. They last more than an hour, a day, a week, sometimes months or even years. They're often formally recognized because they're often supported by management because they can be directed at addressing an item in a strategic plan. They're, by their nature, collaborative. You're sharing your findings, you're offering support, some feedback to other members of the community. And their impact, if at the end of the learning community the results are presented and they're research-based, they're connected to the practice that's going on locally, they have the potential to have great impact. It's not a new concept, been around for a while. What's interesting is how more and more tech tools are available to really facilitate these better than they've ever been. I talked a little bit about Boyer and using his framework as a means to supporting and giving guidance to learning communities. So out of that came a set of proposals based on the findings, based on those 5 elements being so important. I'm suggesting that for the CPS that we investigate setting up some learning communities. Perhaps we're doing that already with the mobile learning project. But there are other possibilities here. We may want to look at some of the items that I've listed here. There may be some items that come out of the strategic plan that suggest that we need to look at some items that will address a key performance indicator. Proposal number 2 is to look at the development of blended or online tutorials. And actually very similar to what I'm doing right now. I'm presenting things via video. And then the third proposal was to invite participation in an edCamp, or to actually pilot one of these. I've had some direct experience with these. I piloted one of these in Dubai a couple of years ago. Great event. full participation, almost by default. More on this on another date. And lastly, the use of digital badges, a means to recognizing PD efforts, to recognize PD efforts that are evidence-based, project-based, that are documented, and rewarding somebody for sharing all of that with us in an attempt to improve our practice. If all that can be done, it can be recognized with a digital badge as well, and more on that. These are quite dynamic, quite an interesting development. So I covered all of those items, and then here we are now. I had hoped